Trump is furious. Before his eyes, world leaders are gathering in China, and he is not there. No invitation, no role, complete disregard. This is the very man who once boasted of his personal friendship with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. In his first term, he called it friendship. He said he could call them any time and make a deal. But those days are gone. The smiles and handshakes have disappeared. In their place are leaders tired of threats and no longer willing to play by Washington's rules. After the recent SCO summit, everything became perfectly clear. Putin and Kim did not go home. They went straight to Beijing to meet Xi. That was no accident. It was a deliberate show of unity aimed directly at Washington. Trump saw it and reacted harshly, accusing them of plotting against the United States. Years of sanctions, tariffs, and the America First policy have led to one conclusion: the United States can no longer be trusted. These countries are building a future where Washington has no place. So the question is very simple: is Trump losing control over the world order? Are the United States being pushed aside while new alliances form in Asia? That is why we need to look at how the landscape of global influence is changing. The victory parade in China was not just a display of soldiers and flags. It brought together the very countries Washington has long considered its main rivals, standing shoulder to shoulder, demonstrating strength and unity. China rolled out its most advanced weapons: submarine-launched nuclear missiles, mobile launchers, swarms of drones, and long columns of armored vehicles. Row after row of soldiers marched in perfect formation, radiating discipline and power. The message was clear: China no longer pretends to be catching up. It presents itself as an equal, ready to face American military power head-on. The real shock came from hypersonic missiles. Entire aircraft carrier groups worth tens of billions of dollars can be destroyed in minutes. Even bases once thought to be securely protected, from Guam to South Korea, now look vulnerable. And it's not just about the parade. It became a symbol of a shift. The balance of power in Asia is changing, and Washington finds it increasingly difficult to keep its promises to protect allies like Japan or the Philippines. The risks are simply too high. Beijing has made it clear: the United States no longer holds unquestioned military superiority in the Pacific. What worries Washington most today is not only China's growth, but also its ability to support allies under pressure. For decades, sanctions were America's favorite weapon, shared by its partners. The logic was simple: cut a country off from finance and markets, and its economy collapses. But China has rewritten the rules. It not only shielded itself, but also created lifelines for North Korea and Russia. Let's start with North Korea. For years, the United States and the G7 strangled Pyongyang with sanctions. Fuel was restricted, bank accounts frozen, trade blocked. On paper, it looked like an iron curtain, but North Korea did not collapse. The reason is simple: China. Today, more than 98% of North Korea's official trade flows through Beijing. That's almost everything: food, fuel, medicine, spare parts. All of it comes from there. In 2023 alone, trade volume exceeded $2 billion, most of it imports. Without this lifeline, North Korea's economy would collapse within weeks. With it, Kim's regime can survive indefinitely. Now, Russia. When after the invasion of Ukraine, the United States and Europe imposed the toughest sanctions, they expected economic collapse. Western banks predicted double-digit GDP contraction, mass unemployment, and financial ruin. But China stepped in again, and the forecasts failed. Instead of collapsing, Russia's economy grew by 3.6% in 2023. The reasons are clear: military spending, domestic demand, and steady energy exports. By 2025, growth slowed but remained positive, around 1.5%. Inflation, which had climbed to 9%, is gradually falling and could drop to 4% by the end of 2026. In other words, Russia adapted. Even the ruble saw a reversal. The currency that many Western analysts had written off rose by nearly 40% in just 1 year, while the dollar, by contrast, began to crack. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $37 trillion. Interest on loans is devouring the budget. Investors are questioning how much longer this can last. Demand for American bonds is falling, and countries like Saudi Arabia and Brazil are openly seeking alternatives. For the first time in decades, the foundation of dollar dominance appears shaky. For a long time, Washington used the dollar as a weapon. Countries that stepped out of line could be cut off from the SWIFT system or have their reserves frozen. This worked as long as there was no way to bypass the dollar. But Russia and China are building an alternative system. Trade between them already exceeds $240 billion a year, and most transactions no longer go through the dollar. Settlements are made in yuan and rubles. Oil, gas, food, and weapons are exchanged beyond the reach of the US currency. And this is not just business. It is a deliberate attempt to undermine US financial dominance. Meanwhile, Russian energy continues to operate despite price caps and restrictions. A huge shadow fleet of tankers carries oil around the world, often above the $60 limit, returning billions to Moscow. At the same time, the Power of Siberia 2 project is moving forward, set to supply China with 50 billion cubic meters of gas annually. This single pipeline will connect the two economies for a decade, guaranteeing exports for Russia and cheap fuel for Chinese factories, entirely beyond the control of Washington and Brussels. Looking more broadly, the picture is even more serious. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are drawing closer into a bloc already called CRING. This is not just a formality, but a parallel system of trade and mutual support. Reports have emerged that North Korea has already sent missiles and even soldiers to Russia in exchange for money, weapons, and training. Iran supplies drones to Moscow, Russia delivers gas to China, and Beijing fills gaps in global markets so that its allies do not suffocate under sanctions. Step by step, an economy independent of the US and the G7 is taking shape. This is the reality Washington does not want to acknowledge. Sanctions, once the main tool of pressure, are losing their effectiveness. Each new wave produces less impact, and workarounds are quickly found for every restriction. Beijing has shown it can soften Western blows not only for itself, but also for its partners. And a troubling question arises. If sanctions no longer work, what leverage do the US even have left? For decades, America relied on the ability to isolate rivals and force concessions. Today, that system is collapsing. We are witnessing not just resistance to sanctions, but the gradual dismantling of a global economic system in which Washington was at the center. Meanwhile, as China, Russia, and North Korea draw closer, the United States is the one paying the price. Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods were meant to hit Beijing, but in the end, they hit America. Companies now pay more for imported components and materials, which translates into higher prices for consumers. Farmers who once sold soy, pork, and grain to China have lost part of that massive market. What was presented as protecting jobs has become a problem for key industries. While Washington's trade ties weaken, Beijing is moving in the opposite direction. China is expanding. It has strengthened economic relations with Russia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. These are no longer just theoretical changes. They are real shifts in trade flows. A striking example is the Russia-China gas pipeline. For years, it remained on paper, but now construction is accelerating. Once operational, China will receive up to 50 billion cubic meters of gas annually. For Moscow, this guarantees revenue despite sanctions. For Beijing, it provides stable and cheap fuel for its factories. The US and Europe remain on the sidelines, losing control over the global energy market. But energy is only part of the story. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China is leaving its mark in regions where Washington once dominated. New ports in Africa, highways in South Asia, and railways in Latin America are not just construction projects. They are long-term ties binding countries to Beijing. Unlike the United States, which conditions aid on political requirements, China focuses on business. This appeals to leaders weary of American lectures on democracy and human rights. The effect is cumulative. Every pipeline, port, and railway strengthens China's role as a central hub in global trade. Every new US tariff pushes countries closer to Beijing. Instead of weakening China, US policy has accelerated the creation of alternative systems where America has almost no influence. To maintain its position in Asia, the US is forced to increase military spending annually. Billions flow into new aircraft, modern ships, and missile defense systems. Yet despite these enormous expenditures, American forces no longer appear as invulnerable as before. Each time China unveils a new missile or weapon system, Washington responds by pouring even more money into defense. Trump's outburst accusing Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim of conspiring sounded loud, but it revealed more. For a man who built his political career on an image of strength and control, it appears as a sign of uncertainty. Essentially, he acknowledged what many have already noticed. US influence is fading faster than Washington is willing to admit. And this time, Trump's usual mantra, "Only I can negotiate," no longer works. Xi, Putin, and Kim no longer need US mediation. They write their own agreements, form their own alliances, and are building a future in which Washington has no seat at the table. If you want to follow where this entire shift is headed, subscribe to the channel and click the bell. See you in the next video.